Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're going to find out what happens when curiosity is stronger than fear. And I am so excited and honored to have with me Justin Fornal, who describes himself as an international explorer and cultural detective. He's a big thinker that simply does not accept the status quo, and his list of adventures is far too great for a short introduction. He's host of Unexplained and Unexplored on the Discovery Channel and the Science Channel. He's an award-winning writer and has written for National Geographic, Vice, The Explorer's Journal, Parts Unknown, and Roads and Kingdoms. He's also co-founder of the History, Arts, and Science Action Network, a nonprofit organization that focuses on relic repatriation, historic justice, and documenting vanishing cultures. Justin's also an extreme athlete, and last year he set out along with his team to be the first to complete the Great Arctic Swim, a 27-mile swim crossing the Nares Strait between Canada and Greenland. This is an adventure that most of us could fail to even comprehend, let alone feel a desire to attempt ourselves. Yet, as Justin shares a glimpse of his story today, I'm confident that his curiosity and passion will help the rest of us find inspiration to trust our own capabilities just a little bit more than before. Justin, welcome to the campfire.
Hello, Scott. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh man, I was so excited. There's so much out there for people to find out more about you, and I think we're probably only going to be able to scratch the surface, but we'll be sure to kind of share some places where people can find out more about your work and some of the really incredible things that you've done. But let's just start with the Great Arctic Swim from Canada to Greenland, because that in itself was just an epic adventure. So if you could we just start with you kind of sharing a little overview of what that was all about?
Sure, absolutely. There's a body of water between Canada and Greenland called the Nares Strait. And the closer you get to the North Pole, really, the narrower it gets. And, I had been I had always wanted to visit the northernmost villages of Greenland, in particular Kanuk, Kattertat, and Sirapluk. And this is one of the places where the Inuktitut people are really living out some of the last of kind of ancient Arctic traditions. And so when I was looking at the map, it's just more kind of like planning out a route in the area to visit these different villages. And then I look up and I see that there's this kind of this big body of land right across the Nares Strait. And of course, I'm like, well, I guess that's part of Canada. That's Ellesmere Island. And in its narrowest, there's an area between the two that's only like 13, 14 miles. And as a long distance swimmer, that is a distance that I had done before. And suddenly the idea of what this expedition would be really shifted. And I became completely obsessed with getting a chance to swim across this pristine body of water. And the more research we did, the more satellites I looked at, I noticed that in those areas that's very tight, it's clogged with ice. Thankfully, we don't know how much longer, but it is clogged with ice, 364 days a year.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of go a little farther south, and there's Pym Island on the Canadian side, and that's a 27-mile crossing. And so I was like, oh man, that's going to be a real rough one, in particular because the water is usually below freezing. It's salt water, so it can get, down to 29.5 Fahrenheit. And it's, a lot of, no matter where you are and when you're going there, it's going to be a lot of ice. It's going to be very cold and really very little in terms of support, So that expedition grew out of a friend of mine who I met on a caving trip, Wes Archer. And Wes Archer said, hey, man, I heard you're trying to get up there. And that's it, getting up. It's one of the most remote, hard to reach areas of the world. And there's only a few flights that go from Nuuk in southern Greenland up to places like Kanuk.
Okay.
And we knew that we'd be leaving out of Kanuk. We wanted to be working with all local team, because the only folks who really go out there other than military is local hunters. And so that was the idea, was to find a way to get to Canuck and have a team of local hunters who would take us out in their boats or in their dog sleds, depending what time of year, to hit that piece of water and attempt a crossing. And so Wes, the way this whole thing worked is, it was certainly too much money for me to go and just make it happen. And Wes had a small plane. Wes has a small plane. It's a Cirrus SR-22. Very fast plane, but once again, it holds probably, 2 people. And
Yep.
we were going up with collapsible kayaks, all of our gear, all my swim gear. And, this would be, the equivalent in my mind of taking a Volkswagen to the North Pole. and that's exactly why Wes was willing to get behind it. Wes says, look, man, if you'll go in this plane with me and attempt this trip from basically New York City up to Canuck, I'll make it happen. And I said, yeah, let's go for it. So he really did the logistical planning of the flight. And so you can imagine we can go 500 miles in this plane, but you have to constantly refuel. So to get up there, he had fuel drops a year ahead of time. You have these ships that drop off supplies to these very, and it's fun to look at. I encourage everyone. It's such an amazing part of the world. Just go north and look at some of these far outposts that are really the last northernmost outposts, especially once you get into the Arctic Circle. And then once you get, like I said, farther into what is considered the high Arctic, the land without trees.
Yeah.
And so fuel was being dropped off there, and that's how the whole thing had to happen. We had to leave New York in this tiny plane, and getting there would have been, one of the biggest challenges, is flying this tiny plane, getting the fuel along the way. And that's, if we survived that, that's when my swim could begin.
If we survive that. So, I mean, there were kind of, and you have a great website, greatarcticswim.com, and it kind of lays this whole thing out, but it's really cool on the website how you kind of broke this journey out into 3 phases. So it was like the getting there, and then like the airfare, the air getting there, right? And then the boat getting there, and then the actual swim itself. So how do you get there?
So we flew right out of, and I've been on a bunch of test flights. So, I mean, Wes is really a hero when it comes to this part of the journey, and really a brilliant strategist. And it was really an obsession of his. And just to let you guys know how the balance is everything, we had coloring books that we were bringing up from Polar Bear International, who's an organization that I do some work with polar bear conservation. They give us these coloring books for kids to bring up there. And the day of, Wes is like, open your bag again. And we were just going through what was in our bag. And he's like, we're not taking the coloring books. I'm like, Wes, we have to take the coloring books. And he said, do you want to die in a fiery wreck, or do you want to get there safely? I'm like, yeah, but the coloring books. He's like, take out the coloring books. Just to let you know, like, that's the level of kind of tension going into it. And of course, the upset, you have to be, that's not my world, is balances and weights and everything. But for Wes, he's such a brilliant strategist in that way. It was like anything we didn't need, we had to leave behind, and once you take off, the scary part, like I said, I know we'll talk about fear later in the show, but certainly the only things that really scare me are those situations where you have absolutely no power to help the situation at all. This plane, I learned how to do the autopilot. If Wes had a heart attack, we had done several like that of what we would do, and it would, return to where we're going. This airplane does have a parachute. So if Wes did die or have a heart attack over the water or over land, I had to not do the parachute over a series of cliffs, because even if you land on there, of course, you're going to fall again. You got one shot. So I was well versed with how to operate the vehicle in that way. But once you leave, what's interesting about it is it has a de-icing mechanism, but we realized quickly into the trip that it wasn't working. And we're going up to where, of course, we're going high Arctic. So what's unique about this plane is large passenger planes go above. They go really high. We're pretty low. We're beneath 10,000 feet most of the time. And if we're too high, we start to ice. And if we're too low, we're getting our teeth knocked in with turbulence. So it was this very strange balance of not being too high, not being too low. And Wes saying, keep your eyes, and as co-pilot, he's like, keep your eyes on the wings, keep your eyes on the wings. Tell me if we start to ice over. I'm like, and you'd see these. He's like, once you ice over, the plane is perfectly aerodynamic, but once you ice over, you turn into basically a rock in the sky, and then you fall to the earth. So I'd be watching out the window like this, and I'm like, oh Christ. And you just see these fingers of death of ice forming on the wing. And I'm like, Wes, we're getting ice. And he would drop down, and then you start hitting turbulence. And then like I said, you try to find this sweet spot. And so I think it would be good to get later, but we had 2 experiences that were very scary.
Yeah. Do you want to share?
Sure. Yeah, I will. The 2 situations there was one on the way there and there was one on the way home. I was not, like I said, we had survival suits, these great survival suits that are provided by Hansen Protection that we put on before we do a big crossing when we cross Baffin Bay. And when we got across onto the Greenland side on the way there, we were going over a place called Disco Island. And Disco Island, look it up on the map, it's, it's not where disco was invented, but it certainly is a place where I said, we were playing some disco on the plane when crossing, and I said, this has been a lifelong dream. We're over Disco Island. Let's play some disco. And so we're going over the island, and he had all these different charts, and the charts you were using were the ones he did not usually use, and that's what he said. He goes, these are the different charts, but these will be fine. So we're going over Disco Island, and I'm looking around me, so you can imagine we're going beneath us. It looks as if the whole island had been covered in milk. Like the fog beneath us, the cloud covering of these mountains was that thick. And you see these black jagged peaks peeking through the fog. And we're flying around and I'm looking over and I swear some of these mountains are higher than the plane. And I said, hey man, I'm looking around and you're getting this very eerie feeling that these mountains are in fact higher than the plane. Wow. And so, he said, no, he goes, well, on the chart, it said our lowest safe altitude is 4,000 feet. We're at 6,000 feet. And now the last thing I recall before going on the trip was, I have a daughter and she was very concerned about my trip. And she said, Dad, I'm worried about your trip. And she had some psychic episodes before where she had kind of said things that really creeped everybody out.
Oh, yeah.
So we do tend to listen if she says
Absolutely.
something. And she said, well, Dad, what if you crash into a mountain? I said, Tati, I'm going to swim. Why would I be crashing into a mountain? She goes, yeah, but you're going to be in that little plane. What if you crash into a mountain? I said, there's no situation. I'm going over the sea. Now, meanwhile, we were over the mountains because the situation in Baffin Bay was so bad. And, as we're going up in the Smith Sound was really rough. That's why we were over land, it wasn't really where we wanted to be. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking around me and I recall her saying that. She goes, I said, I promise, no matter what, I won't crash into a mountain. So we're sitting there and then I'm looking and about a few miles ahead of us, we're about to go into the clouds.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm looking at the mountains and I'm looking at the clouds. And I recall my daughter's voice in my head saying, don't crash into a mountain. And I got a chill. I got a really instinctual chill. And, I do have, we'll call it a spider sense, spider sense.
Yeah.
Where I don't usually feel bad feelings because if I do, it's very precise and it's a very particular situation. Don't go into that place. Don't do this. Don't do that. And I got that feeling. And I said, Wes, I'm really worried. We need to pull up. We need to pull up. He's like, why? And I told him real quick. I said, this is what my daughter said. And now I'm looking at this thing. And we looked and you could see the ridge line was like this. And then it seemed to be ascending into the cloud. I said, fuck it. I said, pull up. So he's like, all right. Pulls up. We go higher up. And then as we go over that area, you look down. And our wheels almost touched the tip of that peak.
Wow.
Meaning that we were going over 200 miles an hour and we would have hit that thing face on and you wouldn't even be able to find us with dental records, And then so he said, maybe we should get back over the water. I don't think these charts are right.
Man, I'm getting chills right now just thinking about your daughter and that conversation. And she, literally saved you.
Well, it was good. It was a nice thing to give her bragging rights when I got home of, we don't tell anyone anything when we're in the field, especially if there's security concerns or risk concerns, because it's not going to help to have people worried about it more than they already are. But when I came home and I told her she saved my life, I think it was pretty exciting for her to be able to, go tell her friends, by the way, just to let you know.
Wow.
Everyone, of course, after I wanted her to pick lotto numbers.
That's amazing. So when you guys are landing that plane, are you landing on like defined airstrips? Or are you landing?
Of course. Yeah. So it does have, it's not a bush plane. There's twin otter plane is the optimal plane for this environment. And they got big fat tires. You can land on tundra. This is in no means that plain, which is why it was I think a lot of people in the aeronautical world, it was an absurd attempt to do this flight, because we needed tarmac, and it's very limited tarmac, and we did want to go much farther up, the place where there was the ice, but he can't land unless he has strip. There's a few companies, Borat was one of these companies who they run the show up there, and you're talking about $40,000 a flight if you want to go to these super remote areas. And of course, that's money I would never, even if I had that money, I wouldn't spend the money on something like that. I'd rather give to somebody who actually needs the money. Yeah. So, but once again, we're going to call them up. We're going to give them promotion in our film. They're the only show in town. And of course, that's, you have to respect that. That's their turf. Yeah. So taking Wes's plane was limiting in some ways, because we had to find airstrips along the way. We had to make sure there was gas waiting for us. And in some situations, there was someone there to pump it. In other situations, he had a tool in the back that you just would hook up to your tank. Where's our tanks? There's no one out there. We're just on this almost like, certainly not abandoned airstrip, but it's definitely not much going on. And we'd open it up with the wrench, we'd pump it, fill up the plane, and we'd take off again.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's unbelievable, these far corners of the world, how things kind of operate.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's really just kind of a glimpse at phase one. So talk to us about the boat portion.
Yeah, the boat portion was great. We had a great team, amongst them a gentleman named Otto. He's a Nukwit, a very famous explorer and hunter, who we went out, a few folks on fishing boats, really, or seal hunting boats, narwhal hunting boats. If it had been when everything was frozen, we would have went via dog sled and towed the boats 40 miles from Connacht to where the water is. But we went 100 miles by boat up into the Nares Strait, and the hope was to get to Pim Island. Pim Island is a famous area where Cape Sabine is. There's quite a few Arctic expeditions in the early 1900s who were there, where, Greeley and quite a few bad things happened there historically. So there's a rich history of that area of the world being, and to this point, it's still very, not very hospitable, and it's very hard to get to. And so that was such a beautiful part of the journey. And, the idea of doing this with folks who go there to hunt, to provide for their families, as opposed to going there with a big team of, well-to-do explorers on a super yacht, to me was really the proper way to do it. And with this being said, we learned so much more than we would have if we went up there with like a bigger science team.
Yeah. So what time of year was this, and what temperatures were you guys facing?
This was in August, and we were facing beautiful temperatures. The original, and just so you're aware, the original expedition was supposed to be in the winter. Okay. Kind of the tail end of that. And what happens is the Nares Strait freezes over at Pim Island and forms an ice arch. Okay. And so you have this body of water that is beneath the ice arch that's almost like a giant pool. Oh, and that was my plan, was to swim across that. When we went, the ice arch had not formed because of, obviously there's a lot of different theories, but certainly a lot of talk that it might have been too warm for it to form. And so we had to wait till it all melted. Okay. So that's why instead of going in March, we went in August, when it would be as warm as it would get. And instead of taking dog sleds to the edge, we took boats all the way from the shores of Connacht up. The problem was, in terms of my swim, is that a lot of old ice had broken off from the Lincoln Sea near the North Pole. And all that old ice had shifted over and was covering the entire Canadian side. So we could not get to Canada. And we're in two fishing boats that are not in no way ice breaking vessels, really in no way ice. We're not designed to endure ice. Okay. They're designed specifically for open water. So we were there. We took refuge in a place called Cape Haven, and our two captains, we talked for quite a while, and they said, we could wait this out a few days. But Otto told us, he's like, man, I was here a few years ago, and all the ice came into Cape Haven, and we were stuck here for 10 days. And he goes, that's your whole trip. He goes, we got food, we can find food, but you won't get anything done. They said, we recommend for safety and for everything else that we'll take you as far as we can into the strait, and then you swim back to Greenland. Mm. So we were going out. So we sat there for a few hours. We debated it. And we went as far as we could into that strait, and they were pushing ice out of the way with their boats. The sheet ice, they're able to pull, obviously the big icebergs that broke off from the glaciers, you're just avoiding those. I mean, some of them are the size of Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
And the scariest thing was, as we're going, you're seeing the ice because the current closed behind us, and you're just seeing this maze close. And you're like, are the boats even going to be able to get out of here? And we went as far as we could in. We were 11 miles. It wasn't 11 miles actually, because it was 11 miles of swimming back because I was zigzagging. But we went, as far as we could into this strait. We were still technically in Greenland waters. The boats were not able to make it into Canadian waters. We certainly were not able to make it all the way to Pim Island.
Okay.
And that's why they said, get out and start to swim, and there was no questioning. Once again, the captains are always the captains. And you have to be humble when you're in the field, and you have to take command from the people who, this is their backyard. If folks were to come on my turf, of course, I'm going to tell you what we're doing. And so went to get ready. And of course, if we had a super vessel, like a super yacht, and I could do it in a Speedo and do it over the course of a week, no question. But the way we're doing things, the way I really like to think the future of Arctic swimming will be long, continuous passages. Yeah. So with that, I had to wear a wetsuit. They told me I had to wear fins because they said, look, if we can't get to you and the ice starts to close, you need to be able to pop up onto that ice or you're going to die. You're going to get either squished or you're going to get stuck beneath two plates. And these plates could be 50 meters long a piece. So, I did have to wear fins. And so the idea was Wes is in a kayak. He has my food and he has my liquid. And our friend Emiliano Rupra was filming from one of the boats. And the two boats are kind of keeping an eye out for animals, keeping an eye out for the route. There's a smaller boat that was kind of going ahead and saying, this is what the ice is doing. And if the ice starts to close, you got to get in the boat immediately. If they, for any reason, if they call it, if there's a walrus, if there's orca, if there's anything that's approaching that could be a hazard, I'm just a swimmer, and I can't see shit, farther than this. So kind of some of the fun stuff that happens in the field is went to go get dressed. Now you have to understand we're living off these boats and they're pretty small. So every night when we go to sleep, everything that we have goes out onto deck. And when we go out, we start working, everything from deck comes back in the boat. That was not my responsibility. So I said, hey, does anybody know where my wetsuit is? And so my wetsuit had been on deck for like the last 2 days. So I went to put it on and it was just frozen solid. It was just like a crunchy wetsuit. Yeah. And I have it's what they call open cell neoprene, which is really just absolutely fantastic. It is a wetsuit. It's not a dry suit, but it really almost sticks to your skin. So it works more like almost like having personal blubber than having a wetsuit where you have water kind of really moving around a lot inside. So I went to get my lubrication to cover my body with, and that had turned in basically into like a slush puppy. Mm. So I'm about to do the coldest, longest swim of my life, and I've got a frozen wetsuit, and I'm covering my naked body in slush on the boat. Wow. This is a hilarious way to start. Of course, you always, the key with all these things is you have to laugh. You have to laugh about anything. We don't bring any prima donnas with us in the field. If anyone's, dramatic or emotional, it's like you can't. This is what it is. This is bound to happen.
Yeah.
You have to laugh at the moment and accept the moment as opposed to say, oh, my stuff is frozen. Who did it? No, dude, it's got to be a stone cold chiller and have fun with the absurdity of it, or you shouldn't go.
Well, and I want to go there as we kind of get through the swim, because some of that is just like building up that experience and that tolerance, right? I mean, and that's kind of been the path of your whole life. So definitely want to come back to that. So take us through the swim portion of this. I mean, I think you started to kind of give us some glimpses, but
yeah, I mean, the water is, I always try to take a moment to have a bit of a ritual to honor whatever ancestral beliefs there are there. So I poured some honey in the water for the spirits, and a woman who I met in the village, an older woman, she said, my spirit will be watching over you during the swim. It's a very interesting kind of spiritual outlook up there in the relation with the ice. She said, the first thing you need to do before you swim is eat a piece of ice. And she goes, the ice is going to warm you because you already have the ice in you, so the ice can't chill you. So it's more of a kind of a spiritual theoretical concept, but it's something I took very seriously. Yeah. And I put some of the there are, the great part is this time of year, there is foliage. There are botanicals growing in the tundra. So I took some flowers and I dropped them in the water. And you work years to get here. And everyone, of course, it's hurry up and wait, hurry up and wait. Everyone's like, okay, it's time to go. And it's like, no, it took me a long time to get here. I'm going to take 60 seconds, 2 minutes to really just enjoy that I'm here. And once I'm in that water, I can't ever enter that water again. I'm in it. So this is just the moment to yourself to really appreciate what's about to happen. And and standing on the edge, the interesting part about these iceberg pieces and the sheet ice is that, you've got the flat part, and then you also have like these edge pieces where I'm kind of standing almost waist deep and just kind of looking down into this water, which is bluer. It's bluer than my shirt.
Yeah, wow.
And you just imagine you do have this strange feeling of what's looking up at you. And once you start, I try to fall asleep in my mind to kind of just put aside anything, because fear is exhausting. Fear is a form of energy that you're using to be afraid and to be tensed up. So you, as hard as it is to do, you really have to just relax. And so that's when, you see people screaming and pounding their chest and then jumping in the water. For me, it's like I try to mentally put myself into a trance and basically fall asleep. And I swim so much that it's more of a muscle memory kind of motor skill. So once I go in, it's a very peaceful process, and I'm not challenging the environment at all. I'm trying to be, at one with it, both physically and spiritually, to make it as easy on myself as possible. This is not a sprint. This is a slow, grueling, horrible swim, but it's a beautiful one. And we start swimming. So every 30 minutes, I'm supposed to be getting a meal. So I had prepared what I found to be two things that I found to be very useful. I got a big Yeti thermos with a gallon of black coffee with honey in it and some electrolyte powder. And that's still hot and it's fresh, and it's key that the hot liquid, the sugar, and the caffeine are all good for keeping you warm.
Yeah.
But really the medicine is, I take sweet potatoes and I bake them and I smash them with bananas, some grated ginger, and some maple syrup. And I have these 10 bags of these sweet potatoes. So half hour into this swim, and it's amazing because you're just looking beneath sheet ice and you see these, looks like palaces made of this like blue ice carved, it's an upside down world. You're looking and you just see these like gargoyles and flowers and strange kind of naturally things from the currents that have carved that no one will ever see.
Yeah, it's
and
amazing.
even as I see them, I want to stop and be mesmerized, but you can't stop. So you're kind of just like, in one of those, you're almost like in a haunted house or something where you're being pushed along on this cart, but you're seeing these fantastical sights. So Wes rings the bell and blows the whistle for my first food. Now, mind you, we had brought this food from New York. It had probably frozen, defrosted. He hands me one and I go to open it and it explodes in my face because it had rotted and fermented. At which point, it wasn't, and I love fermented foods, but this was definitely rotten. And you realize that this was not going to work. And at that point, 30 minutes into an endless swim, we realized we had absolutely no food for me other than maybe a few bars that Wes had, which bars are a lot harder when you're swallowing salt water. Your throat gets very irritated. So you want something, you want baby food. But thank goodness for the coffee. And so, and that was kind of how the swim started, was with a frozen wetsuit and some rotten food. But that's, once again, you got to just kind of laugh about it. Of like, okay, challenge accepted.
Yeah. Can we stop there? Cause like, I wanted to kind of talk about like the mental aspect of it. And you did such a good job of like talking about how you put yourself to sleep essentially, and you kind of put yourself in a trance. But I'm like imagining you, swimming. How long was the swim? Like how many hours were you at it?
7.5 hours, and it turned out to be 11 miles.
11 miles in 7.5 hours. Like what is the mental chatter, if any? Like what's going on? What are the thoughts in your mind as you're going through that?
I had, a zoologist had kind of got me a little concerned about the Greenland shark, which, growing up, I did have a very serious fear of sharks as a kid, which I think a lot of people who saw Jaws too early did, where you're even like, oh, did someone somehow put a shark in this swimming pool?
Yeah.
And of course, as a swimmer, that's one of the reasons I started swimming in open water, was to kind of just to defeat that.
Yeah.
But the more I heard, of course, orcas, anything else, the orcas, the walrus, polar bears, they're all mammals and they do need to breathe. So certainly, and these guys are hunters. This is what they do. So they can see, they were seeing walruses that we were like, where? He's like, there's a walrus. So these guys were, of course, ready to hunt these things, ready to kill them, ready to eat them. So there was certainly some comfort level of them knowing how to watch. But of course, there was so much ice coverage. You know, all these animals are very smart. And I mean, the walrus would want to kill me just for the sake of hearing me scream, not to eat me, but certainly they're very territorial and very tough. But the Greenland shark was the only sleeper where it just seems so absurd. It's the oldest vertebrae on the planet. They're most of them, they get parasites in their eyes, so a lot of them are blind. They're very slow. It's considered a sleeper shark, but they're very much opportunists. And they had said that, you know, when they do have a kill, a lot of times these guys will show up, and they're down 2,000 feet, but they got nothing to do but wait and watch. And when the zoologist called me, he said, I don't want to freak you out, but I am concerned about this Greenland shark. And he goes, I know, obviously there's been no record of attacks on humans, and we're still trying to figure out if they are actually a predator or just a carrion gatherer. But it was just one of those things where I was just waiting for this, you know, strange Leviathan, you know, at my most tired, to just kind of slowly emerge out of the deep and come into focus. You know, at which point, of course, I'd do whatever I could to bob and weave. And, you know, I had a knife on me, which was for more of like, okay, almost to like get up on the ice if I had to. But that was something that kind of at least kept you alert, you know, and in some ways, yeah, you do want to be relaxed, but I think having some reason to stay awake is good. And the ice kept closing around me and kept shifting. So I kept hearing the whistle blow. I'm going right this way. And you'd hear beep, 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 beep. And I look up and they're going like this. And I'm like, the ice is here. Like, it's closing. So then I'd go all the way over here just to kind of go back and go around. So that's why if you can see online, I believe we have the route we took, and it looks like this is because the ice kept moving.
You're just zigzagging through it. Yeah.
Zigzagging like crazy. And it kept it interesting. It kept it, kept you on your toes and kept you awake. It was one of the few swims that I was really kind of aware the whole time, you know, because I feel I had to be. You know, I'll do 10 miles or 60 miles in the Hudson River, and I'll just be totally in another realm, you know, thinking about writing an article in my head, or, you know, thinking about some nice memory. But this was one swim where I was, until stage 2 hypothermia, when things started getting really psychedelic, that I was kind of, you know, pretty alert.
So, wow, I definitely want to go there. That's interesting. But I guess I was kind of imagining wrongly that you just kind of find this sort of meditative groove, but it sounds like on this swim, like you had to stay very alert and focused pretty much the whole time.
I kept looking down. I'm like, I think this animal's kind of slow enough. And that was the only, it really was just like, it would just be just the perfect ending in a bad way, you know. But in me, it was like, you know, for all the experience I had with sharks, it kind of was, it was in my head a bit. And usually I'm very relaxed, but it's like, all right, well, this could happen. And certainly this would be the first. And you know, what an animal to get eaten by would be amazing if you were to. It's better than getting hit by a bus, but certainly was something I was going to avoid if I could.
Did you have to wrestle with fear thoughts, and how did you kind of pull through that?
Like I said, I mean, it comes back to the curiosity is always greater than the fear. And even the idea that being killed by one of these animals would be unfortunate, and certainly not something, but it was, okay, well, if something was going to happen, you know, even if something to survive, what a way to encounter these amazing ancient creatures on their own turf. So it's like, you want to get close to the fire, but you certainly don't want to be burnt alive. So knowing that they're there is part of the thrill, and looking down into this well of darkness and imagining what eyes are looking back. You know, the fear is tantalizing in a way, you know, the idea of, you know, you think of the map with all the dragons on it, and the one way to experience those dragons is to be in the water with no protection, you know. And there's that balance, you know, there's that balance of, well, I'm here. If anything wants to come up and say hello, I'm not moving too fast. So like I said, there is something I enjoy about a little bit of that fear and going into the unknown, because nothing to me would be worse than being afraid and backing down. Being afraid and going forward is one of the best feelings in life. And being afraid and backing down, I think anyone can testify, is one of the worst feelings in life.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just like, it is there, and it is part of it, you know, and it's a special part of it. And then getting back but having respect, you know, like I said, really communicating with the water and communicating with the spirits that are down there. And the idea that, you know, these deities are the ones who are kind of in control of these animals and can send them at you if they feel your intentions are wrong. So there is something spiritual there about having good intentions in your heart and not having it be, I'm doing this because I'm so strong and I'm so tough and I'm this person. No, it's got to be the complete opposite. You're completely kind of bowing down to the powers around you. And I think when you have that in your head, then you're kind of saying, hey, you guys mind if I swim through? You know, I'm here to just talk about how great this place is and this water, and I don't mean any harm. So it's like you can, you know, I'm kind of communicating, as silly as it sounds, when I'm there for hours swimming. I feel I'm kind of talking to the water, talking to the animals, talking to whatever ancient energies might be there, and having a conversation. And it helps pass the time. And it certainly is, it gives you a sense of, certainly not a sense of power, but you feel like you're sitting at the table and you're kind of negotiating your passage rather than just hoping for dumb luck.
Yeah, I'm hearing you said, like, I'm hearing elements of like you just recognizing like you're part of nature, like you're part of being in nature, as opposed to being like this foreign object in this foreign place that's, you know, being under attack. But I think your attitude of like this curiosity, like, well, hey, you know, if it's my time to go, like this is a pretty cool place to go. Like that's just such an awesome way of looking at it. And it makes me wonder, like you said to me that a lot of what's driven you is that your curiosity has been stronger than fear. And I'm curious, do you get curious about fear?
Certainly, you know, I think you know, we're most fearful of the things that we're not accustomed to. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think a good way to compare that is, you know, spent many years in the Bronx and knew a lot of really tough guys, street guys who were, you know, some guys who were gangsters or just fighters or whatever. And these are some of the toughest guys in terms of street level who aren't afraid of anybody. But then you get them out of that environment and you say, hey, why don't we take a swim in the Hudson River? You know, and you see it's like the absolute recoiling horror that even the thought of getting in that water, or, you know, let's go into the I'm going to do this trip down into the bush. The idea of going into the jungle and wild animals. It's like, so people become accustomed to, you know, their world and their surroundings. But then all of a sudden it's like, you know, this person's a really tough person when they're standing on the street corner in a neighborhood that most people would not even want to go into. But then you want to put them on a side of a cliff in a climbing harness, you know, but if you switch those two people, it's like, but the more time you spend in an environment, the more it becomes normalized. You know, if you've ever sparred or boxed, you know, it's like that first time you get punched in the face and you're seeing stars and you're like, oh my God, this is a terrible feeling. But then if you're doing it every day, by the third day, you get punched in the nose and you just immediately hit back. You become numb to these things. And I think that anything that anyone is afraid of, the more you expose yourself to it, the more comfortable you become with it. And then it's just second nature, you know? So I think that is anything that I've been afraid of. If I recognize it, I feel obsessed with exposing myself more to it. And then it becomes normal, you know, then it becomes not an issue.
I feel like this is like a major theme for your whole life, because you just keep pushing boundaries and getting more and more comfortable with things that are like, you keep making familiar, like unfamiliar things familiar. And like in the process, your life experience has just continued to grow and grow. And then all of a sudden you become this person that's able to do something like this great Arctic swim that most people would never even imagine. Is that fair?
Sure. And I think a lot of it comes from looking at maps, you know, looking at maps of places that people are saying, you can't get here, you don't want to go here, whatever it is. And it's looking at it and imagining it. Of course, you're going to visualize what it is in your head, whether it's someplace like Iraq or whether it's a place like the high Arctic. You're creating your version of what it is. And usually it is very different when you get there. Of course, it's going to be different if you've never been there, the smells, the taste, the touches. But then once you go there and you spend time there, over time, you're no longer a stranger. It's no longer this mystery that's haunting your dreams. It becomes kind of familiar, And I think the more familiar things are, the more easy they are for you to just, to go there and know them and to function optimally in that space.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So I want to kind of round out the Great Arctic Swim and then just leave a little bit of time to kind of touch on what the buildup that got you to this point. You mentioned hypothermia, and you mentioned some tough mental challenge that happened with that.
Yeah. So we had been looking at this one big outcropping that we were trying to get to, and I'm swimming. Then we realized that there was a mile of ice between us and that land. And from me, I'm like, oh, we're almost there. You're not even close. It's a big, giant, it's not a mountain, but it's a big, giant cliff, and it's still miles away. And then you see the ice. There's no way to get. It's an ice field. So luckily, Emiliano was on the other boat, my friend, and he said, you got to touch ground, man. You got to get to Greenland. I said, well, can you guys tell me how far we are? So they went ahead, that little boat. They said, it's right around the corner, which of course it was not. But that's what you need. You need people who believe in you and know that it's going to kill you if you don't get there. It's going to, and they will push you as hard as they can. He said, it's right around the corner. It's right around the corner. So I'm just swimming through this maze. And at this point, I hadn't had food in 6.5 hours. I had another hour of swimming to do to get to the shore. I had no idea if they were telling the truth or not, but I'm like, all right, well, I got to just rely on my friends here. And I remember I finally saw green and rock and no ice and no white in front of me in there, no ice. And I saw the boats, and I knew how big the boats were. And I'm like, okay, I think they're against the shore. And it was that last 3/4 mile, half mile that I was just, and you get, it's not a tingling cold. It's a deep core cold. I had a wetsuit on and everything else is numb at this point, but my body was definitely starting to slow down. I hadn't had this food. I really needed that fuel to keep me powered up and keep me warm. And it was just not there anymore. And so I'm swimming, and I could hear all my friends and family on my back, it's just giving you exactly the experience as I had it, kind of like little elves cheering me on. And different people at different moments would come to me. This one is a swimmer, this one's a family member, and say, you're doing great, this is great. And I could feel them like pulling my arms like this, keep going. And just my little feet were moving. And then, the dream as a swimmer with these kind of crossings is to see the bottom, because you're looking into this twinkling abyss for hours and hours. And when you actually see something that's not an animal, that is rock, it's like, oh my God, it's going up towards the shore, And I do recall that seeing way down. I don't know if it was 70 feet or not, but I could see the bottom. And, but when I'd close my eyes, I was having these very strong psychedelic kind of visions which doesn't make any sense, as these things often don't, but closed my eyes and my body was it was 2 carousels, like with horses on it. And it was twisting in 2 different directions, like braking.
Oh my gosh.
And I closed my eyes and I said, so this is a very strong psychedelic vision I'm having here, and I'd be like, okay, if you've ever had way too much to drink and you close your eyes and you feel like you're falling back through the wall, it was that feeling. But the visuals were, I was these 2 kind of horse, carousels going. And so I just decided to keep my eyes open, but then I was seeing more things as I was getting towards the shore. And when we got there, finally I could see it. And, it's never just like a nice little beach. It's like this rocky thing. And I kind of flopped onto it. And Otto, who's our, chief hunter, handed me this piece of rock, and he just shouted down at me. And they were very kind of quiet guys overall, very serious. And he just screamed at me, Greenland. And he handed me the rock, and I held the rock, and then they were able to get me onto the boat. And you do have vertigo for when you're doing any long swim, especially if you're wearing anything. You're getting on land. You're really wobbly for a while. But I knew I needed to get the suit off. I knew I needed to get in the boat, and I had laid out my clothing inside. I laid out towels, and we had a really good hypothermia blanket that had like 100 heating pouches. I'm lucky we didn't skimp on that. It was the more expensive one, but it definitely minimized my damage. And they put me on there, and Emiliano, they helped me get the wetsuit off, and I dried off, get all that water off, and I put on the blanket. And Emiliano had bought me a bottle of one of my favorite whiskeys, Lafroig.
There you go.
We had been stuck so long on shore because of weather that he drank 3/4 of it. There's still plenty in there. So you go to take it. So I'm lying down, I got the blanket on, and like, this is, at least for this trip, the swim is over. So I went to take a shot, and just so you know, your throat is ripped to shreds from the salt water and the breathing and everything. So I couldn't drink it. So I took some hot water from the tea kettle, do 3/4 of hot water, and just, a shot of Lafroig, and I was able to kind of continually enjoy it after that, and stop shaking after about an hour under the blanket.
Man, that's really, it's incredible. I mean, long distance swim, but like in those conditions, and the zigzagging through ice. I mean, what a visual. What did it mean to you to be able to complete this particular adventure?
I mean, to me, on the personal level, it's just to make it to shore. I did not get to do the swim that we set out to do, which was officially from Canada to Greenland because of the ice. But we did the swim that was presented to us. And I think that that's really what it comes down to, is completing the thing that's been assigned to you, that nature that the universe gives to you. And so making it to shore and having my friends, Wes and the rest of the team, push me to get to shore was what made it. And Wes was cold in the kayak. Wes had been in the kayak, and he's like, I'm beat. My butt hurts. I'm really getting beat up out here. I'm really getting cold. And, he was the one who really got behind it. So getting his respect of him seeing that I pushed it way beyond the limit for that section of swim without the food, and him seeing that was a nice experience for, us as friends, and him as the expedition sponsor too, to see, okay, if I put Justin in there, he's going to get it done. He's going to push himself to get it done. And so we're excited about going back and attempting to swim from that narrower passage, which is Hans Island. And that is, if it's clear of ice, it's only an 11-mile swim, which I can do no problem going from, we can go from, Hans Island is now divided between Canada and Greenland, and I can start from one side of the island and swim to the other side of the strait. Yeah. So I'm really excited about going back and completing it,
That's awesome. I love that you're going to go back. Justin, we could probably have an entire year worth of podcast episodes highlighting your different adventures. Our time is getting close to being up on this one, but just for listeners, a lot of people may already be familiar with your work. For those that aren't, how did you become this person? Like, you didn't come out of the womb ready to jump into the Nares Strait and do this swim. Like, this was something that has taken a lifetime. How did you become this person? I think
easy way to describe that is just kind of touch on my professional life and the different things I've done.
Yeah.
But I started, I lived in the Bronx from the 1999 to, into the 2010s. And when I was there, I really enjoyed exploring locally, and had originally been from rural Connecticut. And so when I was there, you can travel the world. One thing I would always say, you can travel the world without leaving the Bronx. And certainly a great way to experience that is through food and through going to, small local restaurants and meeting people from different cultures. And that became something that I was very passionate about. And out of that, I built a television show called Bronx Flavor. And excuse me. And with that, the way we handled that show was, I enjoy having fun and enjoy, as a filmmaker, from my filmmaking life is not taking yourself too seriously. And I think a lot of people do that. And so I created a character called Baron Ambrosia, who was this eccentric kind of 19th century explorer who was experiencing the Bronx for the first time. So he would go into these spots, Puerto Rican Cuchifrito spot, or a Bangladeshi place, or a Jamaican spot on White Plains Road, and be having this really like psychedelic novella of an adventure. So there were kind of these fun skits, but they were all based around real restaurants and real people from the neighborhood. Some people said it was almost like, a strange form of community theater, but these were places you could go, places you could experience. And the show got covered, by the New York Times, and became a really fun way to celebrate the Bronx. And from there, it went on to the Food Network and Cooking Channel. And of course, I think the show was stronger in its comedy and its humor, and it's kind of taking the piss out of food television. So I don't think that food television was really where it belonged. It belonged more in like an Adult Swim, where it could be a little more naughty. So we went on to air on the cooking channel, and people who were watching that were really really interested in Cupcake Wars than they were in this bizarre show about this guy going to, the best deep fried turkey in Compton, or, the best crab cakes in Baltimore, and having these strange adventures with John Waters. And, so we had one season and they were like, this show's really it's too forward thinking for us. It's ahead of its time. We can't renew. And so they didn't renew. And so there I was. My world was food. Anywhere I went in the Bronx, it would be a party, and I'd eat for free. And so I was up to, 250 pounds. I wasn't fitting into any of my suits. And I was like, Jesus, what am I going to do here? My show is not renewed. And I've been working a few years on this arc. And so then you're kind of left flat. And I think that's one interesting thing people think is this person has a TV show. They have lots of money. Well, I just bought a house. And so I had this giant mortgage payment, giant oil heating payment. We're in the Northeast. And now, boom, my show was over. So I was trying to figure out what to do next. So I was fortunate to go and start working for National Geographic behind the scenes, a place I had always felt was kind of a home. I'm a member of the Explorers Club, and certainly my relationships there create a lot of career opportunities for me to use my writing abilities and my expedition knowledge. But on the physical front, I'm like, how the hell am I going to kind of stop eating and drinking every day and gallivanting? So I had always been a swimmer back in high school and done really well with it. I was going to swim in college, but I was more interested in filmmaking. And so I called up the Bronx Historical Society. This is like in February in my house, and it was cold, and I was, out of shape. My cholesterol was high. And I said, has anyone ever swam the Bronx River? And they said, nothing on record, and certainly not by choice. And I said, well, it's 8 miles. I'm swimming it this July. And then every day I started swimming, and I lost 50 pounds. I was back down to 195, was in great shape, and swam that river. And it was a huge event, and tons of people came out, and there was cheering and partying and a lot of media coverage. And then people were like, where are you going to swim next? Where are you going to swim next? And it became an annual thing to kind of stay in shape and to just engage people to do a big swim. So I swam through Newark, New Jersey. I swam through Camden, New Jersey. And then things became bigger when I got sponsored by my favorite whiskey, Lafroig, and Single Cask Nation to swim around 100 miles around Isle of Scotland. And that was the first big international expedition swim, 100 miles, 8 days in the really rough part of the North Atlantic. And out of that came a lot of sponsorship opportunities. We made a film about it. I traveled around with the whiskey company for a year as like their explorer in residence, giving these big presentations. And that was kind of connecting those worlds of a product that I love in swimming and traveling and culture. And from there, we've a good friend of mine, Chad Anderson, helped me kind of create the business model for that. And that's something that we continue to do in terms of one of the ways we get these things funded,
Yeah, it's so awesome. And I know we could go on forever about it. You used a phrase I'd never heard before called the explorer's disease.
Sure.
That was something that we talked about when you and I talked before this. And I love this concept. Can you share for listeners, what is the explorer's disease?
Well, I think the explorer's disease is once again, I think it comes back to looking at maps the way some people may look at pornographic material, and you look at these places that are this little speck on the map, or, essentially in some ways in terms of Western perceptions and Western media, these no-go zones, these no-fly zones, and becoming obsessed with what's there and what's happening there and going there. And, that curiosity is certainly going to outweigh the fear of going there. And it becomes such an obsessive thing that it's certainly great for the personal journey, but it can be detrimental for your financial life, your personal life, but it doesn't matter, because the curiosity and the passion to experience everything that you can in this life it takes precedent over all, and getting there, and no matter what, you're going to find a way. And that's certainly, and recently I started a 501c3, the History, Arts, and Science Action Network. And our primary focus is cultural preservation of, vanishing traditions and crisis zones. So this is a way for us to kind of give back, but it's also a way for me to go to the places I've been dying to work and dying to go that National Geographic Discovery Channel would not send me. Places like Iraq, Somalia, we'll be doing some work in Afghanistan. And it's a way of combining, I'm not there for the journalism. I'm not there for the conflict. I'm there for the ancient frankincense and myrrh routes. I'm there for the lapis lazuli mines. I'm there for, what elements of ancient Sumerian culture are still existing in the marshes of Mesopotamia and celebrating those things. Because it's usually, so that's it, is that explorer's disease is seeing, smelling frankincense in a church and being like, well, where does that come from? And then immediately going home and you're just researching, you've got the maps and you're up till 3 a.m, so obsessed, and then saying, there, and you point the spot on the map, and no matter what, it might take time, but you will go there. You will be scoring those trees and smelling the frankincense coming out. You will be in that lapis lazuli mine with, a 10th generation miner taking out this tiny piece of lapis, and having that experience and seeing these wonderful places.
Well, what's so awesome and really, inspiring is, this person that you've become. It started with curiosity, and yes, you've become this international explorer, but your curiosity started very locally. As you said, just kind of exploring different restaurants, like right where you lived, and just following that curiosity over and over and over again. Things just continued to expand for you. Justin, if people want to find out more about you and all the amazing things that you've done and are doing, what are some of the different ways that people can do that? Sure.
The most, I see social media is somewhat of a necessary evil, but the one place I have been keeping up is on Instagram at Justin_Fornal. And that's where we update everything. And certainly Hassan World, HASAN worldwide.org that's my organization. That's all, moving forward, that's what we'll be doing. Most of everything will be out of that site. So for continual updates there. And like I said, I always encourage people direct message me on Instagram. I love to hear from folks. And one message I do have to everyone is just be more open to trying experiences. People talk a good game. I see people, when people drink some whiskey or they smoke some weed, and all of a sudden everyone's talking about all their adventure ideas and da-da-da. And then it's like, okay, well, cool. I'll call you all on Saturday. And then you see people, they're just not really about it. And people are intrinsically, kind of in some ways, a lot of folks are just a little bit lazy about it. You need to get over that hump and say, I don't care if it's going to be a 7-mile drive to try this one thing. You have to just say, well, just go for it. Absolutely go for it. If there's something strange on the menu, order it. If there's an experience to go to a voodoo ceremony and it's like, just absolutely try these things. You have all the time in the world to sit on your couch and look at your phone. That's not going anywhere. You have time to do that. So I just encourage people, if there is an opportunity to ice climb or cave or try something you haven't tried before, absolutely go out. And certainly I don't think the folks listening to this campfire are those folks, but just do take more opportunities when they come to you to have these experiences.
Justin, I love that you brought that up. Like, what, in your experience, like what is it that stops people from going after it? And what's your advice for how to overcome that?
It's interesting because a lot of people have hangups that they don't tell you about. We have a game dinner in the Bronx every year where we're serving raccoon and possum and all these things. And these people are some big, and a lot of insect dishes, and it's really connecting back to ancient indigenous foodways. And some big food writers, people always love to write about it, but a few people have never come. I said, you've never come to my dinner. And they said, well, I'm an adventurous eater, but I just have a thing with textures and meats that I just can't get over. So a lot of people have stuff that they need to address on their own.
Yeah.
But I just encourage people just to. And you see the difference, man. You see the difference. Like Explorers Club is a great place, and they've got a Friday night frolic, and I pop in once in a while, and you'll get in conversation with people, and you'll see the people who are ready to go, oh, we found an open manhole, and it's going to take us down to this part of the sewers. You see the people who are really about it in that moment, and I think it's something you have or you don't have. And you see the people who have all the awards, the accolades, and have been on these big da-da-da, and they just immediately like, well, we need to contact blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, all right, fuck off. You know what I'm saying? If you're not about it right now and your curiosity does not outweigh your fear and you're not really about it, then okay, go ahead. You can have those big ticket things and those accolades, but the people who truly are explorers in their heart are always ready to have that new experience.
Always ready. I love it. This is awesome, man. There's no doubt in my mind that there's going to be an epic Hollywood movie about your life at some point. And I want to know, when that movie happens, who's going to be the Hollywood actor that's going to play you?
That's a hilarious question. One thing I will say about that is I am writing my first book. Working title right now is Poison to a God, but it really has to do with all my research. Excuse me, my research with kind of different rituals and ceremonies around the world. So hopefully I really look forward to that. And I'm very excited to sit down and write that story. I don't know anyone in Hollywood, in that world, but I reconnected recently with an old college friend who's Joe Manganiello, who was on True Blood. He played the vampire the werewolf on True Blood. And he's a very, we hadn't seen each other. We barely knew each other in college, but somehow we reconnected. We met for lunch, and he very into Dungeons and Dragons, and really an interesting dude and a very tough dude, big guy. And so just jokingly in my head, I said, what would that irony be that, after these 20 years or whatever, that if I did write this book, if Joe liked the story and went on to play me in the film.
I love it. That's so awesome. Say the name of the book again.
So the title that I had written was Poison to a God, but my agent prefers How to Sell Your Soul, a user's manual on transactional spiritualism. So we'll see which one hits the streets.
Man, as I was just looking over all of your stuff and all of your experiences, I was going to ask you today if there's a book in you, and I'm so glad to hear that there is. I will be the first one to buy it. I'm super excited. So when they make this movie, what's the movie going to be called?
That's I've done 2 TV shows, and I will say that a lot of times it'll never be what we think it's going to be, and it's certainly, as funny as it sounds, it's usually a decision that is above my pay grade. Even though the movie would be about me and be my movie, somehow at the last minute they'd be like, well, there's a new CEO at the company, and so they've got this idea, and it'll probably be a terrible idea. So,
I love it so much. Justin, this has been such an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and for following your curiosity and just being who you are, because it's hugely inspirational. It really is. I'm inspired. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Justin's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Justin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Scott, so much. And the last thing I will say is, something I take pride in, everyone should pay attention to this, is be a gate opener, not a gatekeeper. And certainly anyone who wants to reach out to me with questions about different places, please reach out. I take pride in being a gate opener and connecting people, as opposed to being one of those folks who magically stays behind this veil and acts like what they're doing is magic. It's not in any way. Just hard work, take your time, do the research, but I'm happy to help whoever I can. So thank you so much, Scott, and thank you to everyone listening.
Thanks, Justin.